Interviews with JEAN-LUC AYOUN. Agapè, Led Yourself. Part 7. October 13, 2020. Good, so I'll take the word again. So, we have seen during the last 2 days in satsang the architecture and the form, both of the energy and of the anatomy of the brain, to try to understand a little bit what this character is, and where he gets his consciousness from, since we saw yesterday that even when we are conscious, and not superconscious, just conscious, for example, we saw that the decisions we make, whatever they are subject to the circuit of punishment, so there are behavioral injunctions. These injunctions can be as much internal, which is simply the learning of the ego, that is to say generally around 3-4 years, that we really become aware that we are the individual. This awareness of being an individual is going to correspond to the establishment of a program that is going to dictate absolutely all of our behaviors, all of our reactions, through this judgment that has been called reward/punishment, and that until we have seen that, we are all, as a person, subject to the judgment. This programming is the hard disk of the reptilian brain, where the notion of being something separate, something individual, called the person, lies. Don't you find this play on words between there is no person and yet we are a person? There's something quite mysterious about it. So this programming, well, as we said yesterday, astrological influences, our sun sign, our ascendant, whether we are in a normal zodiac or a sidereal zodiac, doesn't change anything. We are somewhere an automaton responding to a program. There really is a cognitive slavery that we can never overcome. I have tried to explain this architecture, but we all agree that even when we are informed and have this knowledge, we are still subject to our character. You remember, I explained to you yesterday that the only time when the reward circuit became more important than the punishment circuit was when there was an awakening. This awakening makes it possible to see, beyond the senses, what I call the dream of creation, the myth of creation, and the planetary and cosmic lie. My lived experience in relation to this is simply, and it fits perfectly, with the lived experience of Dr. Eben Alexander. I invite you to read his book, Proof of the Existence of Paradise. It is a marketing title, of course there is no paradise. The only paradise is formless and without consciousness. This is what we have called the wide paradise, Shanti-Nilaya, the supreme abode of peace, the great silence. Tibetans call it Rigpa. It is the moment when, in the interval between two thoughts, the great silence manifests itself. Personally, as I was saying, for many years I have been able to disappear to myself and to the world, and to remain at the junction of what could be called being and non-being, at the precise moment of the extinction of consciousness, where the ego and the self are tectonized by the absence of light, which is not black, where there is no longer any form, nothing to discern, to feel or to see. And by keeping myself in this state that corresponds to plunging into the heart of the heart, I clearly see that I am that point in the center and I see all around me interlocking globes, which are the worlds of creation. If I take the example of Carlos Castaneda, he obviously had access to this experience, and from there he explored these visions and these worlds, but he could not penetrate into the non-being, otherwise he would have said that all of this is cinema. The one and only person who has lived this is Nisargadatta. Of course, as I said yesterday, you have authors in France, I take, for example, Jean-LUC, who perfectly described what the self is and what unity is, but did not live the complete dissolution. If you look back in time, you have Rumi, Swedenborg, have described perfectly, through all that they have been able to say and life, but none of these great beings have told you that all this was a dream. The problem is that, when you are not motionless in this process of extinction of consciousness, you're attracted, drawn out to point zero by the form, by the colors, by the different dimensional planes, but that you cannot witness the non-being. The non-being is the great silence, from the point of view of the ego it is the great void, from the point of view of the self and from the spiritual point of view, you call it darkness. But I remind you that in all traditions, what we call the shadow, the darkness, has nothing to do with what is prior to the light. Many people are indeed attracted by experiences, but an experience passes, even when you live in vibratory states, even when your chakras, your gates, your stars are active, you do live the vibral, the supramental, but you do not have access to the great silence. The great silence is accessible to you as soon as you have made the sacrifice of your character, of your history, of your memory. If I take the two beings that we know, we in the West in any case. Translator. The two beings who, what? JEAN-LUC. What? Translator. The two beings that what? Yes, we have beings who have expressed, and I will take those who were closest to us. AYOUN when he was alive, every morning would do a meditation on the rising sun. AYOUN knew that there was something behind the light. When I say behind, it's figurative, it's behind, it's in front, it's not a term of distance, but he didn't penetrate it. He said, there is something behind the sun, behind the light, but, knowing it, he couldn't live it. If we take Bernard from Montreal, who said so many things that were so true and so right, in the 1980s he began to speak, you'll find it in his various texts and audios that are broadcast. He too said that there was something behind the higher mind or the supra-mind, but he could not explain it. From that point on, he saw cycles, he saw worlds, he spoke of cycles, he spoke of evolution, he spoke of involution, but that only concerns the film. And when he was also asked about what came after that, he used the word absolute, not in the sense that I say it today, and he made it clear that a John would come from France, representing the wise choice of the Melchizedecs, to unveil the absolute. That is why there is a kind, not of confusion, but, and many teachings, the totality of the spiritual teachings, in which I include myself as well, of course, after having transmitted all that I have received, in fact do not exist. This is not the real thing. I've already told you otherwise. We were told the story with a capital H, to allow us to understand that it's a film and to understand that we are nothing of this film. It's not new. If you know Plato, you have the famous allegory of the cave, and it is indeed the clearest and most precise image that can be evoked. You have individuals at the bottom of a cave who are facing the back wall, and the light is behind them. It illuminates their characters and their shadows. The character looking at the shadow on the wall identifies with that projection, with that place. The individual who is sitting and looking at his own shadow is the observer, the witness. But as long as you are captivated by the play of shapes, of shadows, you are not available to turn around and see also that your character and the shadow of your character are not light, but a projection of light. It is the same for consciousness. Consciousness is the intermediary between film and reality. As long as you are in the film, as long as you are watching the film, you cannot be free. On the other hand, you can illuminate the film, and the more you illuminate the film with greater and greater intensity, the more the shadows will be literally devoured by the light. So the first step is indeed to see that it is a film, no longer to be identified with what is projected on the back wall of Plato's cave, but also to have the curiosity to turn round to see that the light comes from the cave entrance. To do this it stops you from being the witness or observer, you get up and go towards this light. At that moment the film disappears, since there is no more observer, there is no more shadow cast on the back wall of the cave. This is exactly what happens when you sleep. You have no consciousness of the world, you have no consciousness of yourself, and yet you are still there. So all the great mystics and all the wise men, if you can call them that, have been subjected to this notion of evolution, of future, of progression, because they have not passed to the other side of the light. You know, I have spoken to you, I have studied for many years, near-death experiences. We found that among these experimenters, between 4 and 7%, depending on the series, described an experience that was a little more successful, if I may say so. I've already mentioned it in the previous days, but you have to understand that as long as there is movement, as long as there is a cycle, as long as there is cinema, you are captivated, but this is not the truth. Unfortunately, we had to prepare this rediscovery of what had always been there, but which we had forgotten, because we were fixed, if I may say so, on history, on suffering, on knowledge and ignorance, and we were not available, and access to the supramental was not possible. The descent of the Holy Spirit or the revelation of the supramental began to reappear during the year 1984. It took more than 30 years to, little by little, anchor, if I may say so, the information of the truth, time zero, the great silence, that you call it Rigpa, that you call it Parabrahman. These are only words that try to translate the truth, but you know very well that no words can translate the truth. The truth can only be lived, and you can bear witness to the truth. We named it Agapè to give it another name, but it is something that is accessible today. You can see the difference in all these millennia where very few beings have been able to approach even this junction of being and non-being. Of course, if you look at Mahananda Moye, she lived through this. In fact, she has translated beyond her speeches, by her ability to remain immobile, without eating, without changing places. For years she remained seated or lying down, and no one could move her. It was a block of stone weighing several tons. The great novelty, especially since the last years of Baida's life, and especially for all of us today, is that this information and this experience of time zero, is immediate from the moment you stop believing. The first thing we believe, of course, is what we see, what we feel, what we perceive, and so we believe in our own bodies, in our history, and in cycles. Truth is without cycles, truth is without history, and truth is without world and form. You absolutely cannot believe me, but on the other hand you can absolutely live it. This is why Baida, when he arrived in 2012, insisted so much on what we call the witness, the observer, that he insisted so much on the refutation, neti, neither this nor that, and in a way laid the foundations of what we are living now, which is nothing but the end of the dream, the end of the myth and the end of the form. As Christina said yesterday, it is not because I am living the truth that I have rejected life or my life. I don't need to sit in a suit, put on an orange dress or create a movement or anything. I know that I am dreaming and that frees me from all pretensions, from all beliefs. This does not prevent me from having knowledge, but knowledge is about dreaming. Truth can only be lived. It cannot be said, because as soon as there is expression, whatever the form of that expression, there is deformation, there is projection, and there is distance. The only solution, which Enlil repeated to me for weeks before starting the celestial weddings. He made me live every night my own dissolution in the white paradise. Every night for 3 weeks, it was a horrible terror and he repeated over and over again, I didn't even know what it meant at the time. Here get lungs, here and now, the present instant if you like. The present instant, the eternal present, is not meditation, it is not having visions, it is not even going up in vibration. It is only the great silence. You know, there is nothing new in all this. If you even look at Taoism, the texts I read, having been an acupuncturist doctor, they tell us that the Tao, the way, is the hub of the wheel that allows the wheel to turn, that allows movement, that allows displacement, but is neither movement nor displacement. In Chinese medicine, by the way, we talk about center, and the Chinese have differentiated 2 centers. The center place of life, the film, the center source of life, immaterial, the spirit and also this great silence. So you see, the conceptualization of the absolute does not date from today. But today, we are no longer in concepts. We are in the reality of this lived experience which is a state beyond any state, a state of emptiness of projection, emptiness of any identification. At that moment, you're Agapè. And tomorrow, in the part I would say living the natural state, I will give you all the signs, all the symptoms that you manifest during this natural state. The foundation, and I am already talking about it today, the foundation of all of this, beware, it is not something that you seek to cultivate, to develop, it is something that imposes itself spontaneously. You are humble, you are simple and you are joyful. No suffering can reach you. I say suffering and not pain. Pain is present for everyone at any level. I can feel pain like anyone else. I even had the COVID, first even, in December. Laughing. The absolute does not protect you from the disease, but really and concretely, you do not suffer from it. You do not suffer from it anymore. And above all, you do not run away from anything. As was explained when we developed the 12 stars of the head, beyond the personification by certain spiritual entities that have lived on earth. The 12 stars of the head are, above all, spiritual potentials that develop by themselves as soon as you have sacrificed yourself. But this sacrifice is not an act of suicide. Sacrifice is simply to stop believing in anything because you cannot believe and be in the present. It is impossible. This would also be explainable in neuroscience, in molecular biology, in astrophysics, but we have neither the time nor the knowledge to talk about it enough. Time zero exists in all living cells. This is the only example I will give. You have all heard about DNA, chromosomes, what is called cell division. A cell, in order to divide, must first create structures that are next to the nucleus. These two structures that are on either side of the nucleus will allow the chromosomes to line up on the midline between these two structures. So for those of you who have vague memories of biology, I would like to point out that I have had the opportunity to talk about this on countless occasions as well. So you will find all this in all the satsans I have made, but I remind you that today I am going to give you a panoramic vision of the real through illusion. So, when this cell divides, the chromosomes line up in the middle of the nucleus and each one divides into and reproduces the missing part so that the cell division ends. There is a paradox in cell division and also in all cell biology. We live in a space/time at the level of our consciousness. The hour that passes, the days that rise and set, the seasons, the years. So we have a perception of time, we measure time. It so happens that our cells, all our cells in the body, do not evolve in the same space/time as we do. For those who would be interested, because I don't have time to develop in such a short time, I invite you to find on the internet the writings and works of a book called Low Energy Alchemical Transmutations C. JEAN-LUC, where you will understand that, through certain experiments, the time base of cellular metabolism, and in particular in the mitochondria, is absolutely not linear as we know it. Indeed, our cells are capable, through the mitochondria, of transmuting metals. Dr. Kevran, by the way, who is the author of this book, gives us the following experience. I will summarize it for you in 2 minutes. You take a chicken. You remove the limestone from its diet. The eggs will have a soft shell. Give these hens to eat sand, silica, not limestone but silica, and miraculously, the hen makes hard eggs again, maybe not hard eggs but the shell is hard, laughter, silica being a mineral that crystallizes. Translator. Cut. No, I mean. You can hear the translator's laughter. Yes, so we were feeding the hen with silica and I was saying that we expected that, and we would find eggs with the hard shell. And so, when we analyzed the shell, we thought it's going to be eggs with a silica shell rather than a limestone shell. But the surprise we had was that the shell was not made of silica. It was limestone. And after a lot of research, we realized that the silica we were feeding the hen was transmuted into limestone. So the difference between limestone and silica, calcium and silica, is just one more electron. When I say just, it's something huge. You have an electron on the peripheral layer. Look at what is called Mendel's classification, the classification of the elements, and so the hen turned silicon into limestone. The problem is that if we wanted to do that, the temperature would have to rise to thousands of degrees. And the hen does this in her mitochondria, quietly, without any problem. There's actually a temperature rise, but it lasts such a short time, I think it's about 10 to 25 seconds, and for the body of the hen as a whole, there's no temperature rise at all. Of course, we know the physiological role of mitochondria, but very few know the occult, if I may say esoteric, role of the so-called mitochondria. So, I come back to my theme, because this was to give you a little bit of background. So, if we now turn to memory, we know perfectly well in neuroscience, in medicine, that memory is protean. It has several forms of expression. We're not going to give you a lecture on the physiology of memory. But we all know this in our lives, regardless of our age, even if we don't have Alzheimer or some other disease. There is immediate memory and older memory. I can't remember what I did with my keys as an immediate memory. And there is a much older memory which is linked to our history in this incarnation as in any incarnation, which is linked to identification. Beyond the body in which we are, through the appearance of individuality at 3, 4 years of age, when we become aware that we are an identity, the first name by which our parents call us, and so there is a false identification with this memory. Of course, I'm aware that my name is JEAN-LUC AYOUN, that I was born on such and such a date, but this is only the tip of the iceberg, of what I am and what we all are. Memory, so useful in the film, is a terrible weight when one is interested in truth. No memory, no past is true, and yet we are subject to it. We can see that we are children, that we grow up and that we grow old. But it is a problem of identification, not to be confused with the psychiatric syndrome that we could call disidentification or derealization. That's what I wanted to get at with this story of memory, is that when you're agape in the natural state, of course, you always know what your name is, but I guarantee that you are no longer affected by these memories, whatever they may be. The biological program will continue until the extinction of the form, of this form, and when I myself or others, other brothers and sisters, tell you the same thing, but above all it induces transformations such as you are forced to observe. I don't like to talk too much about myself, about my experiences, yes, but I will mention just one. I am the carrier of a family hereditary disease, on which I did my medical thesis. And I no longer have this disease. It has never affected me again. So I met a medical professor who follows people who have this disease. He told me, it's not possible. He wanted to do the genetic tests to find the gene. Indeed, the genes are present and, in a way, as we say in medicine, dominant. That is to say, I have both genes. And I'll spare you the learned names. Laughter. But this professor almost pulled out the few hairs that were left on his head. I no longer had the biological markers for this disease, and yet the genes were still there, the genes of the disease. But the disease is no longer expressed, because during DNA replication, which takes us in the dream from 2 strands of DNA to 12 strands of DNA. Translator. That's 12 you said. You go from 2 strands to 12 strands of DNA. But this new DNA, the 10 new strands, are etheric and not physical. But it ended the suffering and it ended the disease. I never tried to cure myself of this disease, because it was incurable, being written in the DNA. In addition, as they say, I had both genes, which is called homozygous or heterozygous. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's it. So, if you like, I had the formal proof of this absolute in my own cells. But the behavioral and psychological changes are very real. And they are found in all the brothers and sisters who are in this natural state. And there are enough of us today to be the living proof that all these memory phenomena, which are useful in the film, are an enormous weight in relation to the real. That's the lie. I will come back in more detail to the cosmic lie and the planetary lie, as Bernard from Montreal said. And I will show you in an easy way that all those who are still believing in writings, cannot see the illusion of what we have all described, without exception, concerning the supramental and all these interlocking worlds which, in the end, are only us. Memory is a lie. The future is also a lie. Why is it a lie? Because when you live agape, without necessarily needing, as I have lived, to see all these worlds nested within each other, you'll live clearly, because you remember that you are really anterior to consciousness and anterior to the light. As long as you are subject to your consciousness, and here I am not even talking about the film, I'm talking about the projector. You think you're the projector. It's the analogy with Plato's cave, remember? You have shadows on the wall, you have the observer goes towards the light, he turns around, he goes into the light, it's the projector, and he goes through the projector and the light like in the largest NDS. and the difference for those individuals who have done extreme NDES, or for myself who has lived through this state where I was able to maintain my consciousness, without effort, at the junction of being and non-being before the projector appeared, can only tell you that the projector doesn't even exist. It is either a game of form, a game of dimension, and all that exists only for the one who is dependent on memory or dependent on a future. So what happened when we take the example of the allegory of the cave if we go all the way? So you had all these beings who were captivated by the shadows on the wall. There is one who realizes that it is himself who observes this. He looks for where the source of this form comes from. He goes towards the light. He crosses the light. He comes back to testify to the other observers by telling them that the shadows are not true, by telling them that their bodies are not true and that everything comes from the project that we call the source. We can also call it the sun or the solar initiation if you want, and the one who has lived the absolute comes to tell those who are installed in the self that none of this is true. So at the time those who have seen this, whether it be Jesus, Buddha, Mani, Hermes and so many others, are literally lynched or even crucified, by those who are installed in the captive observer of the self and captive of the supramental. This is exactly what happened, for example, to Sri Aurobindo who, after having experienced the supramental, hastened to manifest his visions. The same for Bernard from Montreal who spoke of involution, of evolution. I will talk about that this afternoon, but who did not see what was behind the projector. He got a glimpse of it like so many others, but he didn't live it. And it was perfect like that. It was not a mistake, because in the course of the story, there had to be a certain number of living beings in the film who received the information of time zero, and that doesn't happen overnight. I was one of the first, if I may say so, along with so many others, but there were few of us at that time who benefited from the first descents of the Holy Spirit in 1984, and the progression of the light followed a certain number of processes that have been perfectly described by AYOUN dimensions. So we had to build a story. It wasn't me who built it, it's part of the common scenario that we all wrote to bring to the end of the film, and see that there is no more reality in the film than in the projector. At that moment you see consciousness for what it really is, a way to dream, a way to believe that you're involuted, a way to believe that you're evolved, but it is not the truth at all. One could be very brutal in saying that not everything that happens is real, the only real is silence. The moment when there is no more projection, or even interiorization or meditation, and at that moment you've become human again, as I say, human in its simplicity. You do with what you have as a body, as knowledge, as age, as a friend, as family. You accept all this, you no longer oppose it because you are no longer subject to any judgment of yourself or of anyone else. The reward circuit has taken all the room. You're in this peace and naked joy. I specify unshakable, which does not prevent me from being affected like everyone else by astrological influences. I am a ram, you will never make me a Capricorn or a bull. This is my role in the film, but I can never again be fooled by my form, my life or the film itself. This is true freedom, and in living it you can only see that there is no room for doubt, but I reassure you, I doubt a lot of things about the film just like everyone else. Will my microphone work? I'm also obliged to predict, but it concerns the film. I'm not that, but I play that game in all sincerity. So of course, there are the changes that happen. I know that among all the brothers and sisters who are going through it, we have, if I can say so, the same symptoms, whatever our age, our sex or our past experiences. That's important, because this change in your life, in your temperament, your personality is never an effort, is never a personal development, it's more a matter of relaxation, of acquiescence, of acceptance of both the film and the real. It doesn't pose any problem. What poses a problem like everyone else, like every human being, is obviously the obligations of whatever nature they may be in this world, but we have an enormous advantage, because society is becoming a total and absolute chaos. The shadows are waving on the back wall of the cave. Ah. Can you hear me? Translator. All right, yes. Ah, it's back, okay. Translator. Yes. The observer is destabilized because he realizes that the shadows on the background of the wall become totally illogical and incoherent. Well, you only have to look at social networks, TV or media to say without any difficulty that things aren't really going well anymore. And when it's not really going well anymore, well, the movement stops by itself. The observer is obliged to want to understand, and for that he has to go to the projector. In fact, the nightmare, the chaos that we experience on the stage of the world is the only opportunity that will take us out of the dream. The human being, through what we call resilience, is never as good as when the film no longer makes sense, when the suffering is there, when you are deprived of external freedom, which will not be long in coming, given the arrival of Agapè. When you're tired of playing video games, when you're tired of baking your bread during the confinement, when you're tired of all this cognitive dissonance, then as they say, you'll let go of the film at the case, you'll be nauseous of the form. At that point you will be available for the real and you will get out of your punishment circuit. What is called for us Westerners the Judeo-Christian education, you will come out of the inexorable duality of the film, you will even go beyond the notion of unity, you will go beyond the myth of creation and concretely and really, at that moment, you will be in Agapè, not before. This explains why many brothers and sisters today, who have lit the interdimensional space Agapè resonances, have lived the truth, but it doesn't happen in a minute, not even by your will, but only by the acceptance of the film, of the nightmare. The important thing is to reveal the nightmare even to make you look crazy, simply by illuminating the nightmare, which is what many brothers and sisters do today on social networks, but at some point the nausea will be such that you will have no choice but to live the real. There is nothing to do, there is everything to be according to your own film, but inevitably the chaos of the film brings you to the truth. I understand perfectly, and I have said it many times that you have to let dreamers dream, of a new world, of a new form. When they get tired of dreaming, because the film becomes a nightmare, then they will live the real, no one can escape it. As I said 2 years ago, the Agapè pandemic cannot fail, you are witnessing it right now, in these days. The film unfolding on the screen of the world as in your mind, in your thoughts, will result in a crash that corresponds to that of the first emanation of the light. This is the oath and the promise, it is held in 3 words. I remember, beyond all memory, beyond all will, beyond all desire as well as all fear, of who I am, beyond being and non-being. It is up to you to live it, as it were, to prove it to yourselves. But you cannot serve 2 masters at the same time, either you serve this world or you are the master of your world. I'll stop here for now, I think it's about time. We'll meet at 4 o'clock where I'll continue on the momentum and possibly already have some small questions that can feed. If you want this webinar, we'll take them at that time too, if Christina agrees. Through JEAN-LUC AYOUN. Les Transformations. English Revised Translation. LMF.